There is a specific kind of fear that only exists when you are miles away from the nearest paved road. It's not the fear of bears or mountain lions, those are natural threats. It's the fear of seeing something that looks like a person, acting in a way that no human being should ever act. Build up, I've been an avid backpacker for about 10 years. I usually stick to the national parks in the Pacific Northwest, Olympic, Rainier, North Cascades. The dampness, the moss, the towering Douglas firs, they feel like home to me. 3 years ago, I decided to do a solo 3-day loop in a less trafficked section of the Olympic National Forest. I won't name the exact trail because I don't want anyone going there looking for trouble, but it's deep, dense and prone to sudden fog. The first day was perfect. The incline was brutal, but the solitude was exactly what I needed. I didn't see a soul signal after the trailhead. By the time the sun began dipping below the ridge line, the forest floor was already pitch black. I set up my camp in a small clearing about 50 yards off the main trail. I'm a stickler for leave no trace, so I kept my footprint small, just a one-man tent and a small camp stove. I was sitting on a log, eating my rehydrated chili when the woods went dead silent. If you spend enough time outdoors, you know the rhythm of the forest. There's always background noise, wind in the canopy, crickets, frogs, the rustle of small rodents. When that stops, it means a predator is nearby. I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. I scanned the darkness. My headlamp cut a bright cone through the mist, illuminating floating dust motes and massive tree trunks, but nothing else. Then, I heard it snap. It was a heavy, deliberate snap. Not a deer stepping on a twig, but something with significant weight crushing a dry branch. It came from behind me, maybe 30 feet out. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin and pathetic against the wall of trees. "Is anyone there?" Silence. I stood up, turning in a slow circle with my headlamp. Nothing. Just the endless repetition of bark and ferns. I convinced myself it was a bear. I grabbed my bear spray, unholstered the safety, and sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't eat anymore. I put the food away and decided to just get in my tent. It was only 8 p.m., but I felt exposed. I crawled into my sleeping bag, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening. For an hour, nothing happened. Then, around 9:30 p.m., I heard footsteps. They were soft, rhythmic, and bipedal. 2 legs, crunch, crunch, crunch. They were circling my tent. Climax, I stopped breathing. The footsteps were slow, unhurried. They walked a perfect circle around my campsite, maybe 10 feet away from the tent walls. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. I clutched the bear spray so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to yell out again, to shout that I was armed, but something primal in my brain told me to stay absolutely silent. If I didn't acknowledge them, maybe they would leave. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my tent door. The rain fly was zipped shut, so I couldn't see out, and they couldn't see in, but I could sense the presence, a heavy, static weight pressing against the air. I waited for the zipper to move. I waited for a voice. I waited for a hand to press against the nylon fabric. But there was nothing, just the sound of someone breathing. It was a wet, rattling breath. It sounded like there was fluid in their lungs. They stood there for what felt like an eternity. Probably 20 minutes, just breathing, standing in the pitch black, miles from civilization, staring at a tent. Then, without a sound, a hand brushed against the side of the tent. It was a slow drag, fingernails scratching slightly against the waterproof fabric. ZZZZZT. It went from the top of the tent down to the ground, like they were testing the texture. I almost pulled the trigger on the bear spray right then and there, soaking the inside of my own tent just to get them away. But then, the footsteps resumed. They didn't walk away. They walked away from the door, to the back of the tent and sit down. I heard the distinct sound of a heavy body slumping against a tree trunk right behind my head. I lay there for 6 hours. Every time I started to drift off or calm down, I would hear a shift in the dirt or a cough. The person was sitting 5 feet from my head, separated only by thin nylon and a bit of air. They waited out the entire night with me, ending twist when the grey light of dawn finally begins to see through the rainfly. The birds began to chirp. The silence broke. I waited another hour until the sun was fully up. I hadn't heard movement in a while. Unzipping the tent was the bravest thing I've ever done. I burst out, bear spray raised, screaming get BACK. The clearing was empty. I looked behind the tent. There was a patch of flattened ferns against the large hemlock tree where I had heard the breathing, but it was the footprints that made me pack up my gear in 3 minutes flat and run the 10 miles back to the car without stopping. The ground was soft from the humidity. There were boot prints circling my tent, just like I heard, but where they stopped at the door, and where they dragged their hands down the side. There were no boot prints. There were bare feet. Massive, wide, human feet with splayed toes pressed deep into the mud. Someone had hiked 10 miles into the wilderness barefoot just to watch me sleep.